Muhammad Ali Jinnah, A Life Drawn in Resolve. Part 1. Childhood and Education. 1876, 1893. Birth in Karachi. On 25 December 1876, in the bustling port town of Karachi, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was born in a modest apartment of a three-story brick building known as Wazir Mansion. At that time, Karachi was not yet the sprawling metropolis it would later become. It was still a developing town of perhaps 100,000 inhabitants. Yet it carried the energy of a place on the rise. The Suez Canal had opened only a few years earlier, shortening sea routes between Europe and Asia. Karachi's location on the Arabian Sea, 200 nautical miles closer to Europe than Bombay, made it increasingly valuable as a trading hub. Ships carrying cotton, grain, and spices crowded its harbor, and the air was thick with the shouts of traders, the creak of bullock carts, and the smell of salt and coal. Into this atmosphere of opportunity and upheaval, Jinnah was born as the eldest of 7 children. His father, Jinnah Punya, belonged to the Koja community of Gujarat, originally a family of weavers who had turned to trading. Ambitious and restless, Jinnah had moved from Kathiawar to Karachi to seek his fortune in commerce. His mother, Mithabai, was a woman of quiet strength, known in the family for her devotion and discipline. Together, they hoped their first son would secure for them a stable position in a rapidly changing colonial world. They named him Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Later, as he grew into adulthood and crafted his public identity, he would simplify it to the spare, memorable Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Early disposition. From the beginning, Jinnah was a child apart. Relatives remembered him as reserved, observant, and strangely serious for his age. Where other boys played noisily in the dusty streets, he often stood aside, watching, measuring. He was known to be neat in his dress, careful even with the limited clothes he had. Disorder, whether in appearance, in behavior, or in speech, seemed to offend him. The young Jinnah grew up surrounded by languages: Gujarati at home, Sindhi and Kuchi in the neighborhood, Urdu in broader society, and English in school and commerce. This multilingual environment left its mark. Over time, he became fluent in several tongues, but it was English that would dominate his professional and political life. Ironically, the leader who would one day command Muslim India's political destiny expressed himself most forcefully in the language of the colonizer. Yet this was less betrayal than practicality. For Jinnah, clarity was everything, and English became the tool that best suited his exacting mind. Schooling. Jinnah's formal education was uneven but formative. He began at the Gokal Das Tej Primary School in Karachi, where he learned basic literacy and numeracy. For a brief period, he was sent to Bombay to live with relatives and attend school there. Bombay was already India's premier city, full of European architecture, tramcars, and crowded law courts. For a boy from Karachi, the city's atmosphere of commerce and cosmopolitanism left an impression that never faded. On his return to Karachi, Jinnah was enrolled at the Sindh Madrasatul Islam, an institution founded in 1885 to provide modern education to Muslim boys. Here, English was introduced as a medium of instruction, alongside religious studies. He later shifted to the Christian Missionary Society High School, and in 1892, at the age of 16, he passed his matriculation examination under the University of Bombay. Teachers described him as intelligent, though not the most studious in a conventional sense. He disliked rote memorization but excelled in reasoning, language, and debate. More than once, classmates found him listening intently in the local magistrate's court, fascinated by the cut and thrust of legal argument. Even as a teenager, he seemed to recognize that law, not business, not administration, was the field where words became weapons and order could be shaped by argument. Childhood stories. Like many figures destined for fame, Stories later grew around Jinnah's youth. Some true, some perhaps embellished. Neighbors claimed he studied under gaslight in the street when his family could not afford sufficient lamps. Others recalled him lecturing friends to play cricket rather than marbles, because cricket, unlike marbles, was a gentleman's game. Whether literal fact or embroidered memory, such stories point to the same qualities: ambition, seriousness, and a sense that he was preparing for something larger than childhood. Family and early marriage. Jinnah's parents, concerned about his future and eager to anchor him in tradition, arranged his marriage at an unusually young age. In 1892, just before he was to leave for England, he was married to his cousin Emma Bai, who was only 14. It was a union meant less for romance than for reassurance. His mother hoped that marriage would tie him to his roots and protect him from the perceived dangers of foreign lands. Tragically, the marriage was short-lived. Within a few years, while Jinnah was abroad, both his mother and his young wife died. The double blow, though rarely discussed by Jinnah himself, hardened his reserve and deepened his determination. Grief made him less sentimental, more disciplined. From then on, he poured his energy into work rather than domestic attachments. The London opportunity. The turning point came in 1892, when an English business associate of his father, Sir Frederick Lee Croft, offered him an apprenticeship in London with the shipping firm Graham's Trading Company. For his father, this was a chance for his son to learn the ropes of international commerce. For Jinnah, though, the opportunity quickly became something more. Despite his mother's fears, the family agreed to send him abroad. With fare and modest expenses provided, the young man, just 16 years old, set sail for England in late 1892. The voyage itself was a rite of passage. From the hot, noisy streets of Karachi to the fog-shrouded docks of London, from a merchant household to the world's greatest imperial capital, a glimpse of transformation. What Jinnah carried with him from Karachi was not a fully formed plan, but a temperament, a drive for order, an insistence on dignity, and a sense that success lay in mastery of language and law. London would test and refine these instincts. In the months ahead, he would abandon the shipping apprenticeship, enroll at Lincoln's Inn, and immerse himself in the study of law. He would shorten his name, adopt the tailored suit as his uniform, and train his voice for the courtroom rather than the marketplace. But those transformations belonged to the next chapter. For now, the boy who had wandered Karachi's courtrooms, who had absorbed the noise of a port town and the lessons of a disciplined household, stood on the deck of a ship entering the Thames. The air was damp, the skyline crowded with spires and chimneys. In his pocket he carried letters of introduction and the expectations of his family. In his mind, he carried something less tangible but far more decisive: the conviction that life, if lived with precision, could be argued into shape. Part 2. London Years and the Making of a Barrister. 1893–1896. The damp mist of an English morning greeted the young Muhammad Ali Jinnah when his ship docked at London. He stepped off with quiet resolve, suit pressed, eyes intent, no wide-eyed spectacle, but a purpose tempered by ambition. The London of 1893 was a city framed in soot and steam, where horse-drawn cabs rattled on cobblestones and gas lamps glowed against the gloom. For an Indian youth arriving from Karachi, it was a world of shadow and promise, abandoning commerce for law. Originally, his passage had been secured for an apprenticeship in trade, with Croft's firm offering him the chance to learn shipping business. But soon after arrival, Jinnah made a decision that surprised many. He abandoned the mercantile track and declared his intention to study law. His father, who had backed the commercial route, bristled at the deviation, but Jinnah remained firm. To his mind, law offered a power that commerce lacked a capacity to shape institutions, to argue justice, to wield words that could outlast fortunes. He applied to Lincoln's Inn, one of the 4 inns of court where barristers train, and was admitted. The choice of Lincoln's was not casual. He later claimed that he was drawn to its entrance by the names of lawgivers, including Muhammad, inscribed there. Though biographers note the actual inscription as mythic, what matters is that Jinnah believed it. Inside, a mural depicted Muhammad among jurists, and to Jinnah, that synthesis of religious heritage and legal tradition carried symbolic force. The inn system required strict discipline. There were readings, moots, dining terms, students must attend dinners to qualify, and pupillage under a senior barrister. Jinnah adopted the regimen as one might adopt monastic vows. No idle hours, no sloppiness, few words wasted. He studied Blackstone, Koch, and modern case law in the flickering candlelight. He attended moots and observed trial courts in Westminster. He made acquaintances in chambers and libraries. In less than 3 years, he transformed from a distant student into a barrister in training. His time in London also shaped his worldview. He encountered liberal political philosophy of Bentham, Mill, Spencer, and colonial debates. How dominions such as Canada and Australia held negotiated autonomy within the empire. He listened from the gallery to Indian MPs, like Dadabhai Naoroji in the House of Commons, absorbing their rhetorical strategies and diplomatic manner. He read the reformist journals and constitutional critiques. London was not just a legal classroom. It was the intellectual forge in which Jinnah's political self was annealed. The transformation of identity. During these years, Jinnah shortened his name from Muhammad Ali Jinnah to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a sparser, stronger signature. He began dressing in Western-style suits, impeccably tailored, with detachable collars and starched shirts. He invested in discipline of attire as though his person were an argument. Clean lines, tight proportion, every fold precise. He owned dozens of suits, which he often quipped he would never wear twice in public. Even as his health failed later, he insisted on appearing formally dressed. "I will not travel in my pajamas," he is said to have declared. Some moments of restlessness surfaced. For a brief time, he attempted stage acting with a Shakespearean company, experimenting with voice and gesture. But the venture lasted only until a stern rebuke from home, reminding him that the stage offered theater, not gravitas, and that his life was to be argument, not performance. He returned to law with renewed focus. He also experienced personal loss from afar. While he labored at Lincoln's back home, his mother and first wife, Emmy Bai, both passed away. The double grief, so far removed, arrived with a shock. He buried himself in law, in chambers, in reading, never allowing sentiment to slow him. For Jinnah, loss became a form of discipline. Time must not be wasted, and emotions must not dilute purpose. Called to the bar. In 1895, at age 19, Jinnah was called to the bar, the youngest Indian of his time to achieve that milestone. The event was a formal ceremony. Robes and wig, senior colleagues gathered, names read, oaths sworn. The parchment in his hand was both certificate and covenant. He was now of the profession. He stayed in London briefly, taking cases to the Privy Council, the apex court of the empire, handling appeals from India and elsewhere. This exposure sharpened his mind. He learned how constitutional points, colonial statutes, and imperial precedents intersected. Yet his ambition was not rooted in a desire to build a lifetime career in London. His heart lay in India. The law in London was a proving ground. India would be his arena. Before long, he sold his stock in Hampstead, wound up his practice, and prepared to return to the subcontinent in 1896. The London Lessons. Several lessons from London remained with Jinnah forever. Discipline, above all. He internalized that mastery comes from relentless preparation, not improvisation. Precision of language. Legal argument must be clear, tight, unambiguous, institutional respect. Courts, statutes, constitutions mattered. He would later insist that political change come through law, not chaos. Self-presentation, dress, posture, speech, all must align with gravitas. Secular professionalism. Though a Muslim, Jinnah did not cloak himself in religiosity in the courts. He believed law's logic transcended sectarianism, even if politics would later require religious vocabulary. When he finally boarded the steamer for Bombay in early 1896, his manner was no longer that of a boy or of a guest, but of a professional returning to claim his place. The English winter receded. The Arabian Sea advanced. He carried with him not only a barrister's certificate, but an identity he had shaped, lean, disciplined, exacting. In the deck's salt wind, as the ship's bow advanced toward India, he would have looked at the horizon and seen not only a homecoming, but the stretch of a long road ahead. A road where law, argument, and dignity would be his tools, and where he would attempt nothing less than to reshape the nation. Part 3. Return to India and early legal career. 1896–1905. Homecoming to Bombay. When Muhammad Ali Jinnah disembarked at Bombay in 1896, he was no longer the uncertain teenager who had left Karachi 3 years earlier. He was now a barrister of Lincoln's Inn, dressed in tailored English suits, carrying himself with a composure rare even among seasoned professionals. The bustle of Bombay, the trams clattering, the cries of merchants at Crawford Market, the British officers striding down Colaba Causeway, met him as a city more cosmopolitan and restless than Karachi could ever be. It was in this atmosphere, alive with commerce and colonial authority, that Jinnah began to build his career. He initially stayed with relatives, but soon established his chambers. Yet London's credentials, impressive as they seemed, did not guarantee instant success. The Bombay bar was fiercely competitive, dominated by men of reputation, wealth, and connections. The likes of Ferozesh Mehta and Badruddin Tyabji had already carved their names into the courts. For a young returnee with little backing, the path was steep. Struggles of a young barrister. Jinnah's first years were lean. It is said he often sat for hours in court without a single client. Occasionally he drafted contracts or handled minor cases for fellow community members, but these were scraps rather than sustenance. More than once he thought of returning to Karachi to practice in a smaller arena. Yet his ambition kept him in Bombay. He spent his idle hours studying case law, observing proceedings, and refining his craft. He was meticulous about his dress silk ties, polished shoes, a pocket watch, and equally meticulous in argument. Judges began to notice the tall, slim figure who spoke in clipped sentences, never wasting a word. His style contrasted sharply with the florid, emotional pleading of many Indian lawyers. Instead, he resembled the English barristers he had trained among. Cool, precise, logical. His break came when John Molesworth Macpherson, a respected acting advocate general of Bombay, noticed his sharpness and hired him as a legal apprentice. This gave Jinnah exposure to important cases and administrative work. By 1900, at the age of only 24, he was appointed a temporary presidency magistrate, the youngest to hold such a post in Bombay. Though he resigned after a short tenure, preferring private practice, the appointment gave him credibility and visibility. Rising reputation. Gradually, his reputation grew. He began appearing in higher courts, handling commercial disputes, property cases, and appeals. His opponents found him formidable. He did not bluster, but he dismantled arguments with surgical precision. Colleagues recalled that he never raised his voice yet commanded attention. By the early 1900s, Jinnah was recognized as one of the promising barristers of Bombay. Wealthier clients sought his counsel, and soon his income rose. In later years, he would rank among the highest-paid lawyers in India, commanding fees that rivaled those of British barristers. But what mattered in these first years was the confidence he gained, that through law he could hold his own against anyone, whether fellow Indian or colonial authority. The political climate. While Jinnah built his career, India's political climate was changing rapidly. The Indian National Congress, founded in 1885, was becoming a voice of reform, though still dominated by moderates loyal to constitutional methods. Leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji argued in Parliament in London for India's grievances. Yet a younger, more radical generation was stirring men like Bal Gangadhar Tilak demanding self-rule, boycotts of British goods, and Swadeshi, economic self-reliance. Bombay was a cauldron of these debates. In court corridors and clubhouses, in lecture halls and editorial columns, the question was the same. How far should Indians push against the Raj? Jinnah, steeped in the constitutionalism of London, aligned with the moderates. He believed law and persuasion, not agitation or violence, would yield progress. His idols were not revolutionaries, but parliamentarians. Entry into politics. Jinnah's entry into politics was almost inevitable. His legal work brought him into contact with Firozeshah Mehta, the Lion of Bombay, who was both a formidable lawyer and a Congress stalwart. Mehta became a mentor of sorts, exposing Jinnah to legislative affairs and political strategy. In 1904, Jinnah attended the Indian National Congress session in Bombay. Watching the debates, he was impressed by the platform as a forum for political expression. By 1906, he was actively involved, working closely with moderate leaders. His style in politics, as in law, was not emotional but rational. He drafted resolutions, analyzed proposals, and spoke with clarity. Within a few years, he gained a reputation as an able debater, measured, forceful, never given to demagoguery. Early ideals. At this stage, Jinnah's creed was Indian nationalism. He saw himself not as a Muslim leader, but as an Indian leader. He admired Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a moderate reformer who combined constitutional agitation with social reform. Gokhale's emphasis on education, economic development, and negotiation left a mark on Jinnah. He also respected Dadabhai Naoroji, the first Indian MP in Britain, whose ability to confront the empire in its own parliament struck Jinnah as exemplary. In 1906, when the Muslim League was founded in Dhaka, Jinnah kept his distance. He dismissed it as too parochial, too communal. To him, India's future lay in unity across religious lines. He earned the epithet Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim Unity in later years because of his insistence that both communities must work together within a single constitutional framework. Personal life. During this period, Jinnah's personal life remained Spartan. The early loss of his first wife and mother had left him solitary. He lived in apartments in Bombay, maintaining his routines with military precision. He was known to be fastidious about time. Hearings must start on the dot, meetings must not drift. Friends sometimes found him aloof, but they could not deny his charm when he chose to engage. He had a dry wit, often delivered in perfectly timed English sentences. His love of the stage remained. He attended Shakespearean performances at Bombay's theaters, and his diction in court was said to carry a touch of the dramatic, though never theatrical. He also enjoyed Western literature, especially works of politics and history. Seeds of leadership. By 1905, Jinnah was not yet the towering figure he would become. He was still a rising lawyer, a cautious politician, and a man loyal to the ideal of Indian self-government within the empire. But the traits that would define him were already visible. Discipline. He prepared meticulously, whether for court or political speech. Clarity. He reduced complex matters to sharp, precise arguments. Secular nationalism. At this stage, he rejected communalism, seeing himself as an Indian first. Ambition. Though polite, he radiated the sense of a man who intended to leave a mark. The decade closed with Jinnah poised on the threshold of greater prominence. His law practice was flourishing. His reputation in the Congress was rising. His voice was beginning to carry weight. The young barrister who had once waited in empty chambers for clients now stood ready to argue not just cases, but the future of a nation. Part 4. Rise in Congress and the Ambassador of Unity, 1906, 1916. The political stage expands. By the first decade of the 20th century, Muhammad Ali Jinnah had established himself as one of Bombay's most respected young barristers. But the courtroom alone no longer satisfied him. The law gave him success, but politics offered him significance. He was convinced that India's destiny could only be reshaped by constitutional reform, and that men trained in law and persuasion must lead the effort. The Indian National Congress was the natural vehicle. Founded in 1885, it had grown into the premier forum for Indian aspirations, though it was still dominated by an educated elite. The Congress had two factions: moderates like Dadabhai Naoroji and Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who sought gradual reform within the empire, and extremists like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who called for Swadeshi, boycotts, and eventually independence. Jinnah, with his lawyer's respect for order, instinctively aligned with the moderates. First steps in Congress. Jinnah's first real political appearance came at the 1904 Congress session in Bombay, where he met Dadabhai Naoroji, the grand old man of India. Naoroji's speech on India's drain of wealth impressed him deeply. When Naoroji later stood for election to the British Parliament, Jinnah campaigned for him among Indian expatriates and rejoiced at his victory. It confirmed his belief that Indians could confront the British with their own tools of debate, law, and representation. By 1906, Jinnah was working closely with Firozeshah Mehta, a giant of Bombay politics. Mehta's mentorship gave him practical experience in legislative affairs, preparing him to navigate assemblies and councils with the same discipline he brought to court. The Muslim League and Jinnah's distance. The same year, in Dhaka, the All India Muslim League was founded to protect Muslim interests. While many Muslims saw it as a counterbalance to the Hindu-dominated Congress, Jinnah dismissed it at first. He considered it narrow, sectarian, and a distraction from the larger goal of Indian self-government. He famously said that a self-governing India within the empire was the real issue. Communal organizations would only divide. At this stage, Jinnah's identity was firmly nationalist rather than communal. His speeches were peppered with references to India's unity. He declared that Hindus and Muslims must work together like two hands of one body. Entry into the Imperial Legislative Council. Jinnah's big break came in 1909 when he was elected to the Imperial Legislative Council, the highest lawmaking body under the Raj. It was a remarkable rise for a man barely in his 30s. In council, he quickly earned respect even from British officials for his command of language and his refusal to bend. His interventions were often sharp and effective. When an official referred to Indians dismissively, Jinnah reminded him coolly, "We are not mendicants. We do not beg for favors. We claim rights." Such sentences, delivered in perfect English with controlled intensity, made colleagues take note. The Lucknow Pact of 1916. The defining moment of this period came with the Lucknow Pact of 1916. For years, Hindus and Muslims had quarreled over representation. How many seats should each community have in councils? Should they vote jointly or separately? The Congress and the League had failed to find common ground. But in 1916, under pressure from world events, the First World War was raging and Britain was vulnerable, leaders of both bodies met in Lucknow. There, for the first time, they struck a compromise. Congress accepted separate electorates for Muslims, while the League agreed to cooperate on constitutional reforms. Jinnah was central to these negotiations. His eloquence, tact, and legal acumen helped draft terms acceptable to both sides. The pact was hailed as a breakthrough in Hindu-Muslim cooperation. It gave Jinnah the title he would carry for years: Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim Unity. The Ambassador of Unity. In these years, Jinnah's political creed was simple. India was one nation. Hindus and Muslims, despite religious differences, must fight together for self-government. He envisioned a federal India with provincial autonomy, minority safeguards, and constitutional checks, but within one united framework. He often said, "We are not Hindus, we are not Muslims, we are Indians first." This was not mere rhetoric. It reflected his conviction that communal divisions would cripple the independence struggle. He abhorred religious slogans in politics. While Gandhi mobilized masses through spiritual appeal, Jinnah preferred the cool logic of law. Style and reputation. Jinnah's style in politics mirrored his courtroom demeanor. He never shouted, he argued. His sentences were carefully crafted, his pauses deliberate. Even his opponents admitted he had an almost magnetic authority. Sarojini Naidu, the poet and Congress leader, famously called him the Ambassador of Unity, praising his ability to bridge divides. Physically, he cut a striking figure. Tall, lean, always immaculately dressed in European suits. In a country where many leaders adopted simple homespun khadi, Jinnah's Savile Row attire stood out. Yet it symbolized his message. Indians could be modern, disciplined, and equal to the British in sophistication. Tensions beneath the surface, yet even at the height of his role as unifier, tensions simmered. Some Hindu leaders still distrusted separate electorates. Some Muslim leaders suspected Congress of dominance. Meanwhile, radicals like Tilak and Annie Besant pushed for home rule with a fervor Jinnah considered reckless. He admired Gopal Krishna Gokhale, whose gradualist, reformist politics mirrored his own. But Gokhale's death in 1915 left him without a mentor in Congress. And though he respected Gandhi as a moral force, he disliked his methods, mixing religion with politics, mobilizing masses with symbols rather than arguments. For Jinnah, it was disorderly, emotional, even dangerous. Toward a crossroads, by 1916, Jinnah was at the peak of his early career. He was a successful lawyer, a respected legislator, and hailed as the voice of unity. He could look at the Lucknow Pact as proof that constitutional methods could indeed reconcile differences. But history was shifting. The First World War was ending, the world order was cracking, and India's political climate was about to change. Gandhi's arrival on the national stage would electrify the masses in ways Jinnah could neither approve of nor match. The very qualities that made Jinnah effective in counsel, discipline, restraint, rationalism, would soon seem inadequate against the tide of mass politics. The next decade would push him from unity to disillusionment, from nationalism to communal advocacy. But in these 10 years, 1906 to 1916, Muhammad Ali Jinnah embodied his highest ideal, that India, in all its diversity, could still be argued into unity. Part 5. From Unity to Isolation. Break with Congress, 1917, 1920 seconds. The winds of change. By 1917, the political landscape of India was shifting rapidly. The First World War had drained Britain's resources, and promises of reform filled the air. The Montague Declaration of that year spoke vaguely of the gradual development of self-governing institutions. For nationalists, it was a hint of progress. For Muhammad Ali Jinnah, it was proof that constitutional agitation could yield results. But the war years also brought a new figure to prominence: Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Having returned from South Africa, Gandhi introduced a style of politics unlike anything India had seen: mass mobilization, spiritual symbolism, civil disobedience. Where Jinnah emphasized speeches in council halls and petitions to parliament, Gandhi called peasants into the streets, urging them to spin khadi, boycott British goods, and break unjust laws. At first, Jinnah watched with wary interest. He admired Gandhi's sincerity but disliked his methods. To Jinnah, mixing religion with politics, even in the form of Gandhian Hindu symbolism, was dangerous. It stirred passions rather than reason. Worse, it risked dragging politics into disorder, away from law and constitutional clarity. The Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms and Disillusionment. The Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms of 1919, later embodied in the Government of India Act 1919, offered limited concessions, enlarged legislative councils, a system of diarchy in provinces, some Indian ministers. Jinnah, always pragmatic, welcomed it as a step forward, though far short of self-government. But hope soured quickly. The same year brought the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, when General Dyer's troops fired on an unarmed gathering in Amritsar, killing hundreds. For Jinnah, who had built his faith on British fairness and the rule of law, the massacre was a shattering blow. He resigned from the Imperial Legislative Council in protest, declaring that such tyranny made a mockery of constitutional progress. This was the first great rupture in Jinnah's belief in gradual reform. He still held to law and logic, but he now saw that British pledges could not be trusted without pressure. Clash with Gandhi. As Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement in 1920, Jinnah found himself increasingly isolated. Gandhi's call electrified masses across India: peasants, workers, and students. Suddenly, politics spilled from council chambers into bazaars and villages. For many, Gandhi became the embodiment of India's conscience. Jinnah, however, stood apart. He criticized Gandhi's mixing of religion and politics, particularly the use of Hindu imagery like spinning wheels and Ram Rajya. He also distrusted the Khilafat movement, which Gandhi had allied with, seeking to rally Muslims around the Ottoman Caliphate's fate after World War I. Jinnah considered it misplaced. Why should Indian politics hinge on Turkish issues? He feared it would communalize politics further. His letters and speeches from this period revealed deep frustration. He told Gandhi directly, "Your methods may one day lead to disaster. I cannot follow you." In 1920, at the Nagpur session of the Congress, Jinnah openly opposed Gandhi's resolution on non-cooperation. He was booed, jeered, and shouted down by the crowd. For a man who prized dignity and rational debate, it was intolerable. Soon after, Jinnah resigned from the Congress. The ambassador of unity was leaving the very stage where he had once shone brightest. Years of political isolation, the 1,920 seconds, became a decade of political wandering for Jinnah. He continued to practice law, his income soaring as he became one of India's most sought-after barristers. In court, he was unchallenged, commanding fees few could afford. But politically, he seemed adrift. The Muslim League, still weak and faction-ridden, failed to inspire him at first. He tried to mediate between communities, supporting the All-Parties Conference and constitutional schemes, but the growing polarization left little space for his rational middle ground. He drafted his famous 14 points in 1929, outlining Muslim demands: federalism, provincial autonomy, separate electorates, safeguards for minorities, and 1/3 representation for Muslims in the central legislature. It was a lawyer's brief, carefully balanced, seeking fairness without partition. But the Congress dismissed much of it, and Muslim politicians themselves remained divided. personal life in the 1920 seconds. Amid political turbulence, Jinnah's personal life underwent dramatic changes. In 1918, he married Ratanbai Ruddy Pati, the spirited daughter of a wealthy Parsi industrialist. She was only 18. He was 42. Their marriage, fiercely opposed by her family, was the subject of gossip across Bombay. Ruddy converted to Islam and married him in a simple ceremony. For a time, the couple seemed deeply in love. Ruddy, stylish and outspoken, brought color to Jinnah's otherwise austere life. They had one daughter, Dhingra, in 1919. But as years passed, strains appeared. Jinnah's obsession with work and politics left little room for family life. Ruddy, sensitive and bohemian, felt stifled by his formality. Their marriage grew cold. In 1929, Ruddy died tragically young, at only 29, leaving Jinnah devastated. He never remarried. The loss deepened his solitude, adding a layer of melancholy to his austere personality. Friends noticed he became even more reserved, burying himself in law and politics. Reputation as a statesman. Even in isolation, Jinnah's reputation as a statesman endured. British officials respected him for his moderation, his refusal to pander to crowds, his command of constitutional detail. Indian colleagues, even those who disagreed, admired his integrity. He was incorruptible, precise, always punctual. Sarojini Naidu once described him in the 1920 seconds as the solitary figure with marble features and a sphinx-like expression. He was admired, but rarely loved. Yet, even his critics conceded that when Jinnah spoke, his words carried the weight of authority. Toward exile. By the end of the 1920 seconds, Jinnah was politically marginalized. The Congress, under Gandhi and Nehru, moved toward mass mobilization and independence. The Muslim League, weak and divided, lacked direction. Jinnah's attempts at compromise failed repeatedly. Tired of factionalism and disillusioned with both sides, he withdrew from active politics. In 1930, after the failure of the Round Table conferences in London, he quietly settled back in Hampstead, England. Many believed he had retired permanently, returning to his law practice and seeking peace away from India's chaos. But destiny was not done with him. Within a few years, he would be called back, not as a fading moderate, but as the only leader capable of uniting India's Muslims under one banner. The 1930 seconds would transform Muhammad Ali Jinnah into the Quaid-e-Azam, the great leader, and set him on the path to Pakistan. Part 6. Exile in London and Rebuilding the Muslim League. 1930. 1937. Retreat into exile. By 1930, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was exhausted. 2 decades of political struggle, his rise in the Congress, his battles for Hindu-Muslim cooperation, his crafting of the 14 points had left him disillusioned. Congress had embraced Gandhi's mass politics. Muslim leaders squabbled endlessly. The British stalled on real concessions. At the Round Table conferences in London, 1930-32, he had tried to argue for constitutional safeguards, but he found himself overshadowed by louder voices and competing agendas. Disheartened, he withdrew. Renting a house in Hampstead, he resumed legal practice before the Privy Council, where appeals from the colonies were heard. In London, he lived almost as he had as a student, orderly, solitary, immersed in law. To acquaintances, he confided that he was finished with Indian politics. "There is too much confusion, too much intolerance," he sighed. Many assumed he would remain in England permanently, a distinguished barrister far from the quarrels of Bombay, a changed India. But while Jinnah sat in Hampstead, India's political landscape shifted dramatically. The Government of India Act of 1935, the most sweeping reform yet, introduced provincial autonomy and promised elections in 1937. For the first time, Indian parties would govern provinces with real authority. This created both opportunity and peril for Muslims. If the Muslim League could not assert itself, the Congress would dominate, and Muslims might be marginalized in their own provinces. Leaders of the League, weak and divided, realized they needed Jinnah's authority. Delegations traveled to London to plead with him to return. They argued that without his leadership, Muslim politics would fragment into provincial fiefdoms. Slowly, Jinnah was persuaded. Return to India. In 1934, after nearly 4 years away, Jinnah returned to Bombay. He was welcomed not with fanfare but with relief. Here was a man of stature who might restore direction. He found the All India Muslim League in shambles. Membership tiny, funds depleted, organization chaotic. Many Muslims had joined provincial parties or aligned with Congress. The League, conceived in 1906 as a guardian of Muslim interests, was a hollow shell. Jinnah set to work like an administrator. He reduced membership fees so ordinary Muslims could join. He restructured provincial branches, established working committees, and insisted on regular sessions. His approach was not populist but corporate. He believed in paperwork, rules, systems. First, we must have an organization, he told colleagues. Then we can have power. The 1,937 elections. The real test came with the provincial elections of 1,937, the first under the new act. Jinnah campaigned tirelessly, touring provinces, addressing meetings, and urging Muslims to rally behind the League. He argued that only a united League could safeguard their future against Congress dominance. The results were sobering. Congress swept the polls, winning majorities in most provinces. The Muslim League fared poorly, securing only about 5% of Muslim seats. In the largest Muslim-majority provinces, Punjab and Bengal regional parties, not the League, prevailed. Many dismissed the League as a failure, and Jinnah's project seemed doomed. But the aftermath turned the tables. Congress, triumphant, formed ministries in several provinces. In power, it adopted policies, promotion of Hindi, imposition of Vande Mataram in schools, cultural symbols drawn from Hindu tradition that alienated Muslims. Reports spread of discrimination in jobs and neglect of Urdu. Whether exaggerated or not, these grievances resonated deeply. Jinnah seized the moment. Jinnah's response. Rather than despair, Jinnah turned Congress's dominance into his argument. He toured the country pointing to the Congress Raj as proof that Muslims could never rely on majority rule alone. In speeches, he was sharp but calm. The Congress is not the whole of India. It represents only one community. If we do not unite, we shall be drowned. His message struck a chord. League membership began to grow, especially among students and professionals. The humiliation of the 1,937 elections became a catalyst for consolidation. Jinnah, once considered aloof, now stood as the only leader with a national vision for Muslims. Transformation of image. This period also transformed Jinnah's public image. He began to be called Quaid-e-Azam, the great leader. Though he remained austere, his persona took on an almost iconic quality. Always in tailored sherwani or suit, always erect and precise, he embodied discipline at a time of chaos. Unlike Gandhi, who mingled with masses in simple attire, Jinnah never sought intimacy with crowds. Yet the very distance became part of his authority. To many Muslims, he symbolized dignity, a leader untouched by corruption or compromise. His speeches were not fiery but deliberate, presenting grievances like a case in court. He did not inspire through emotion but convince through logic. Seeds of partition. By the late 1932, whispers of a separate Muslim homeland grew louder. The poet-philosopher Allama Iqbal had already spoken in 1930 of a Muslim state in northwestern India. Students at Aligarh University debated the idea passionately. Jinnah himself remained cautious, avoiding the word Pakistan, first coined by Chaudhry Rahmat Ali in 1933, and focusing on safeguards within a federal India. But the trend was clear. Muslims were rallying around the League, and the dream of partition was gaining emotional force. Jinnah, the lawyer who had once championed unity, was slowly, methodically, preparing to lead a movement of separation. By 1937, Jinnah had returned from political exile to transform himself into the undisputed leader of Muslim India. The decade that had begun in retreat ended with him standing at the helm of a resurgent Muslim League. The failure of the elections had paradoxically made him stronger, for it provided the grievance and urgency around which to build unity. He was no longer the ambassador of unity of 1916, nor the isolated moderate of the 1922nd. He was now the Quaid-e-Azam in the making, a man gathering a people around a cause that would soon shake the foundations of the subcontinent. Part 7. The Lahore Resolution and the Demand for Pakistan. 1937. 1940. After the elections. The elections of 1937 were a turning point. Though the Muslim League performed poorly at the ballot box, the experience changed its character. Congress ministries now governed most provinces, and their policies, whether intended or not, convinced many Muslims that majority rule would mean Hindu dominance. Reports circulated of schools replacing Urdu with Hindi, of Hindu nationalist songs being forced upon Muslim children, and of Muslim employees being sidelined. For years, Jinnah had warned of precisely this outcome. Now he pointed to the lived experiences of Muslims under Congress rule as proof. Traveling through India, he told audiences that unless Muslims united under the League, they would become second-class citizens. His speeches, calm but cutting, framed the issue not as Hindu versus Muslim sentiment, but as constitutional logic. A nation that cannot protect its culture, its law, its language, is not a free nation. Building the League into a mass party. From 1937 onward, Jinnah devoted himself to turning the League into a genuine mass movement. He lowered membership fees, established student and women's wings, and toured tirelessly across provinces. The All India Muslim Students Federation became a vital ally, spreading League propaganda in colleges and universities. Jinnah's appeal was striking. Always impeccably dressed, he appeared at rallies not in simple peasant clothes but in sherwani or suit, his monocle sometimes glinting in the sunday. He spoke in English or careful Urdu, never pandering, never raising his voice. Yet his very aloofness gave him an aura of authority. To the middle classes, he embodied discipline and incorruptibility. To peasants, he became a symbol of dignity. Crowds began chanting, "Quaid-e-Azam," the great leader. By 1939, the League's membership had grown into the millions. From a hollow organization in 1934, it had become the recognized voice of Muslim India. The world at war. In September 1939, the Second World War erupted. The British unilaterally declared India a participant in the war effort, without consulting Indian leaders. Congress ministries resigned in protest, hoping to pressure the British into granting independence. Jinnah saw opportunity. The Muslim League, unlike Congress, did not resign. Jinnah calculated that by cooperating selectively with the British, the League could gain recognition as an essential partner. This decision widened the gulf between Congress and the League. When Viceroy Linlithgow sought support, it was Jinnah, not Gandhi, who negotiated terms for Muslim participation. This pragmatic stance allowed Jinnah to argue that the League alone spoke for Muslims. "No settlement without us," he declared, and the British, desperate for stability, began to listen. Toward Lahore, by the end of the 1930 seconds, the idea of partition had moved from intellectual debate to political platform. The poet Allama Iqbal, in his 1930 Allahabad address, had envisioned a Muslim state in the northwest. In 1933, student activist Chaudhry Rahmat Ali coined the word Pakistan. At first, Jinnah dismissed such notions as premature, but by 1940, circumstances pushed him toward embracing the demand. The growing alienation of Muslims under Congress rule, the collapse of Hindu-Muslim cooperation, and the political leverage provided by the war convinced him that only a separate homeland could secure Muslim rights. The Lahore Session, March 1940. On 23 March 1940, at Minto Park, today Iqbal Park, in Lahore, the Muslim League held its annual session. Tens of thousands gathered under green banners, their voices rising in chants of Pakistan Zindabad. The atmosphere was electric. Jinnah rose to address the assembly. He spoke for more than an hour, calmly but with iron conviction. He argued that Hindus and Muslims were not merely communities, but two nations, distinct in religion, culture, law, and history. To force them into one polity would mean permanent conflict. "It is a dream that Hindus and Muslims can evolve a common nationality," he declared. "Hindus and Muslims belong to two different religious philosophies, social customs, and literatures. They neither intermarry nor interdine together, and indeed they belong to two different civilizations." The resolution adopted that day later, called the Lahore Resolution, demanded independent states in the Muslim-majority areas of northwest and East India. The word Pakistan was not used, but its meaning was unmistakable. Partition. Impact of the Lahore Resolution. The Lahore Resolution transformed Indian politics. For Congress, it was shocking. Jinnah, once the ambassador of unity, was now the herald of separation. For Muslims, it was galvanizing. A clear, bold demand that gave direction to their anxieties. For the British, it complicated negotiations. No longer was the question simply of Indians versus the Raj, but of two nations with conflicting claims. The press reacted with a mix of alarm and admiration. Some editorials denounced Jinnah as divisive. Others recognized his brilliance in reshaping the debate. What none could deny was that he had altered the course of history. Jinnah's leadership style after Lahore. Jinnah's stature reached unprecedented heights. His leadership style was unique among Indian leaders. Gandhi drew masses with simplicity and spirituality. Nehru inspired youth with socialism and idealism. Jinnah relied on discipline, logic, and dignity. He did not sing slogans or wear homespun cloth. Instead, he treated the political arena as a courtroom, presenting grievances, cross-examining opponents, and delivering judgment. His health was already fragile. Tuberculosis had begun to sap his strength, but he concealed it. To the public, he remained the unbending Quaid-e-Azam, the man whose very presence commanded respect. Toward a decisive decade, between 1937 and 1940, Jinnah had accomplished what once seemed impossible. He transformed the Muslim League from a moribund organization into a mass movement. He shifted Muslim politics from petitions for safeguards to a demand for sovereignty. And he placed himself at the center of India's constitutional debate, not as a supplicant, but as the spokesman of a nation. The stage was now set for the decisive battles of the 1940 seconds: negotiations, elections, and ultimately partition. From the verandas of Bombay to the parks of Lahore, from exile in Hampstead to the roar of crowds, Muhammad Ali Jinnah had found his mission. No longer the constitutional nationalist of 1916, he was now the architect of Pakistan. Part 8. The Road to Partition. 1940. 1947. After Lahore, the Lahore Resolution of 1940 marked a watershed. It signaled that the Muslim League was no longer content with constitutional safeguards or minority rights. It demanded sovereignty. For Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the resolution was both culmination and beginning. Culmination of years of argument that Hindus and Muslims were distinct nations, and beginning of the final phase of his struggle. The British and Congress dismissed the resolution at first. Some called it a bargaining chip, a negotiating tactic. But Jinnah was relentless. He insisted it was not a threat but a principle. Muslims would not accept a constitution that left them at the mercy of a Hindu majority. The war years, the Second World War, dominated the first half of the 1940 seconds. With Britain under siege, India's loyalty was critical. Congress leaders, demanding a promise of independence, launched the Quit India movement in 1942. The Raj responded with mass arrests. Gandhi, Nehru, and most of Congress's high command were jailed. Jinnah seized the moment. With Congress sidelined, the Muslim League was free to expand. It cooperated with the British war efforts selectively, presenting itself as the responsible party. Membership soared. Student groups, professionals, and provincial elites rallied to Jinnah. By 1943, the League had become the unrivaled voice of Muslims across India. Jinnah's stature grew accordingly. To millions, he was now Quaid-e-Azam in more than name. His speeches were awaited with reverence. His photograph adorned homes and offices. Where once he had been seen as aloof, now he was embraced as the embodiment of Muslim destiny. The Simla Conference, 1945. With the war ending, Britain turned again to India's future. In 1945, the Simla Conference was convened by Viceroy Lord Wavell to discuss power sharing. Congress sought to dominate. Jinnah insisted that only the League could represent Muslims. He rejected any formula that allowed Congress's Muslim members to speak for the community. The talks collapsed, but Jinnah emerged stronger. By holding firm, he had made clear that no settlement could bypass the League. His insistence that he alone spoke for Muslims was now recognized by both Congress and the British. The 1945-46 elections. The general elections of 1945-46 were the real test. Jinnah campaigned tirelessly, crisscrossing India, repeating his central argument. Muslims were a nation, and the League was their sole representative. The results stunned observers. The League won all but a handful of Muslim seats in the Central Assembly, and nearly 90% in provincial legislatures. The verdict was unambiguous. Muslims had chosen Jinnah. The men who in 1937 had led a marginal party now stood at the head of a united community. For Jinnah, it was vindication. Pakistan is now inevitable, he declared. The Cabinet Mission Plan. In 1946, the British cabinet sent a mission to India to propose a framework for independence. Their plan envisioned a united India with a weak center and groupings of provinces, Muslim majority in the northwest and east, Hindu majority elsewhere. At first, Jinnah accepted it. It seemed to offer safeguards while avoiding partition. But Congress balked, particularly Nehru, who insisted that the central government must have real power. To Jinnah, this was betrayal. He withdrew support, declaring that Congress intended to strangle Muslim autonomy. The breakdown of the Cabinet Mission Plan marked the last chance for a united India. From then on, partition was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty. Direct Action Day. On 16 August 1946, the League called for direct action to demonstrate Muslim resolve. In Calcutta, the protests spiraled into violence. Riots left thousands dead. The Great Calcutta Killing shocked the nation. Hindu-Muslim relations, already strained, now seemed irreparably broken. Jinnah, accused of inciting violence, defended himself by saying the League had called for peaceful protest, and that responsibility lay with Congress and the Raj for failing to maintain order. But the riots underscored the depth of division. Blood now marked the road to Pakistan. The final negotiations. In 1947, Britain, weary and weakened, resolved to quit India. The new viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, was tasked with overseeing the transfer of power. Mountbatten hoped to preserve unity, but Jinnah stood firm. Partition was the only solution. The negotiations were tense. Congress, led by Nehru and Patel, reluctantly accepted partition as the price of independence. Jinnah demanded not only sovereignty but speed. Any delay, he warned, would mean anarchy. On 3 June 1947, Mountbatten announced the plan. India would be partitioned into two dominions, India and Pakistan, the birth of Pakistan. On 14 August 1947, Pakistan came into existence. At midnight in Karachi, the Constituent Assembly convened. Jinnah, now Governor General, addressed the members. "You are free. You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques or any other place of worship. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed. That has nothing to do with the business of the state." The words reflected Jinnah's lifelong creed, a state built on law, not sectarianism. Yet outside the chamber, partition unleashed horror. Across Punjab and Bengal, trains of refugees arrived, laden with corpses. Villages were burned, families slaughtered. Nearly 14 million people fled across borders. Up to 1 million perished. For Jinnah, Pakistan was both triumph and tragedy. He had created a nation, but at a price he had never sought. Quaid-e-Azam in triumph. In those first days, Jinnah's presence steadied a fragile state. Thin, ill, yet unbending, he became the symbol of Pakistan's survival. Crowds thronged his car, chanting his name. For Muslims who had endured terror, he embodied hope. But he also knew the weight of the burden. Pakistan began with empty coffers, inadequate bureaucracy, and a flood of refugees. India refused to release funds promptly. Violence continued on the borders. In his private hours, Jinnah confessed exhaustion. Yet in public, he remained the Quaid, firm and unyielding. Between 1940 and 1947, Muhammad Ali Jinnah transformed Indian politics. He took the League from obscurity to dominance, converted grievances into a movement, and forced Britain and Congress to concede partition. His methods were unlike Gandhi's or Nehru's. No mass marches, no utopian dreams. Instead, he wielded law, discipline, and relentless clarity. The Lahore Resolution had been his opening argument. Pakistan, his final judgment. But triumph was not peace. The new nation was born in blood, and Jinnah's frail health would not allow him long to shape it. The final chapter of his life leading Pakistan through its first perilous year remained to be written. Part 9. Pakistan's first year and Jinnah's final days. 1947–1948. A nation is born. On 14 August 1947, the dream became reality. Pakistan, carved from the western and eastern flanks of the subcontinent, stood as the largest Muslim-majority state in the world. The green and white flag was hoisted in Karachi, the new capital, as crowds wept and cheered. For millions, it was the culmination of decades of struggle. For Muhammad Ali Jinnah, now sworn in as Governor General, it was the fulfillment of a vision he had carried with implacable determination. Yet the jubilation was shadowed by catastrophe. Partition unleashed one of the largest migrations in human history. More than 14 million people crossed borders. Muslims to Pakistan, Hindus and Sikhs to India. Trains of refugees arrived packed beyond measure, sometimes with corpses instead of passengers. Villages were burned, women abducted, children orphaned. Between 500,000 and 1 million people perished in the carnage. In Karachi, Jinnah addressed the Constituent Assembly with words that echoed his lifelong ideals. "You are free. You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques or any other place of worship in this state of Pakistan." He envisioned a secular, law-based republic where religion would remain personal, not political. The burden of refugees, the immediate crisis, was overwhelming. Millions of refugees poured into Pakistan's cities, overwhelming resources. Camps sprang up in Karachi, Lahore, and Dhaka, filled with the destitute and starving. The government, barely formed, had no bureaucracy, no financial system, no army fully under its control. Jinnah threw himself into the work. Though in failing health, he toured refugee camps, issued orders, pressed officials to provide food, shelter, and medical aid. His presence alone lifted spirits. Refugees who had lost everything felt reassured when the Quaid-e-Azam himself walked among their tents. Still, the challenges were immense. Pakistan began with almost nothing. No established civil service, no banking infrastructure, no central army command. India delayed the transfer of its share of financial assets, worsening the crisis. Jinnah, visibly gaunt, labored tirelessly, chairing meetings, dictating memoranda, and insisting on discipline. Kashmir and the first conflict barely. Months after independence, Pakistan faced its first existential crisis. Kashmir, the princely state, majority Muslim but ruled by a Hindu Maharaja, hesitated between joining India or Pakistan. When tribal militias from Pakistan's northwest invaded in late 1947, India intervened militarily, and the First Indo-Pak War erupted. Jinnah was furious at what he saw as India's aggression and betrayal. He ordered Pakistan's army to intervene, but British commanders, still in charge of both armies, resisted escalation. The conflict hardened the hostility between the two new states. Kashmir, unresolved, became a wound that would fester for decades. For Jinnah, the Kashmir crisis was both strategic and symbolic. He believed Pakistan's security depended on it. He also believed that denying Muslims their right to self-determination, there was a violation of the very principle on which partition had been based. Struggles of governance beyond refugees and war. Pakistan faced staggering administrative challenges. The new government had to create ministries, courts, and legislatures from scratch. Civil servants scrambled to organize departments. The economy faltered. Shortages of food, medicine, and housing plagued the nation. Jinnah's leadership style, authoritative, disciplined, uncompromising, was both a strength and a limitation. He inspired obedience, but he delegated little, exhausting himself. Ministers often waited for his word before acting. His insistence on control kept chaos at bay, but it also slowed innovation. In his speeches, he constantly emphasized unity, faith, and discipline, the motto he gave Pakistan. He warned against corruption, nepotism, and sectarianism. "If we want to make this great state of Pakistan happy and prosperous," he declared, "we should wholly and solely concentrate on the well-being of the people, and especially of the masses and the poor." Health in decline behind the stern facade, Jinnah was gravely ill. Tuberculosis, which he had concealed for years, was now advanced. Long hours, little rest, and constant stress worsened his condition. Only a handful of close associates knew the truth. To the public, he remained the tireless Quaid. In 1948, his health deteriorated visibly, yet he refused to rest. He traveled to Lahore, Peshawar, and Dhaka, rallying the provinces. He insisted on visiting refugee camps despite exhaustion. Photographs from this period show a frail, hollow-cheeked figure, yet still immaculately dressed, still erect, still commanding. In July 1948, he visited Quetta, seeking relief in the cooler climate of Baluchistan. But by September, his condition collapsed. On 11 September 1948, barely a year after independence, Muhammad Ali Jinnah died. He was 71. Mourning the Quaid, his death plunged Pakistan into grief. Millions wept openly. Trains stopped as passengers prayed. In Karachi, his funeral drew throngs beyond counting. Leaders of every persuasion paid tribute. Even his rivals in India acknowledged his stature. Nehru, deeply conflicted by partition, admitted that Jinnah had been a man of iron determination. For Pakistan, his loss was devastating. The fledgling state, still struggling with refugees, war, and instability, was deprived of its only unifying leader. Legacy and contradictions. Jinnah's legacy is vast, complex, and contested. To millions of Pakistanis, he is the Quaid-e-Azam, father of the nation, who gave them identity and homeland. His photograph adorns currency. His words are quoted in schools. His mausoleum in Karachi stands as the nation's central shrine. Yet debates endure. Was his vision of Pakistan secular or Islamic? His 11 August speech proclaimed freedom of religion and the separation of faith from state. Yet the movement he led was built on Muslim identity. Some argue he sought a secular democracy for Muslims. Others believe he intended an Islamic polity. The ambiguity reflects both his pragmatism and the evolving context of his struggle. Another contradiction lies in his method. Jinnah was no mass mobilizer like Gandhi, no philosopher like Iqbal, no romantic like Nehru. He was, above all, a lawyer. He approached politics as litigation. Frame the issue, marshal the facts, present the case. His courtroom demeanor became his political style: precise, logical, relentless. It gave him unmatched clarity, but sometimes left him isolated from the emotional currents of the masses. Final assessment. Between 1940 and 1948, Jinnah accomplished what few believed possible. He created a nation, he transformed the Muslim League into a national force, negotiated with an empire, and confronted adversaries who outnumbered him. He did it not with armies or slogans, but with the force of will, argument, and strategy. Yet Pakistan's birth was marred by tragedy, partition, violence, refugee suffering, Kashmir's unresolved fate. Jinnah did not live to guide the state through these storms. His early death left Pakistan vulnerable to instability, military dominance, and ideological battles. Still, his achievement endures. Without Jinnah, it is difficult to imagine Pakistan's creation. His iron determination turned a fragile demand into geopolitical reality. His figure, austere and commanding, remains etched in the memory of a nation. Epilogue. On that September day in 1948, as the funeral cortege carried his coffin through Karachi's streets, many must have wondered, could Pakistan survive without him? In truth, Jinnah had given the country both its birth and its challenge. He had carved out space for a people, but the task of shaping a state was left unfinished. 75 years later, debates about Pakistan's identity, democracy, and future still return to Jinnah's words. Was he promising a secular republic or an Islamic state? Was Pakistan to be modern and pluralist, or exclusive and theocratic? The answers remain contested. But one fact is beyond dispute. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, frail yet unyielding, austere yet magnetic, solitary yet commanding, stood against history and bent it. In less than a decade, he turned an idea into a country. That achievement alone secures him a place among the great nation builders of the modern world.